Terrific. Okay. Just make sure that's it. Right. Folks, give me a thumbs up if you can see me and you can see the Goldilocks behind me.
Got it.
Terrific. Okay. Thanks very much. So this is part of the 52-week MBA. This is about using what's known as the Goldilocks principle, which is something a little bit different. As always, no rainbows, no unicorns. There will be stuff here that will make you think, but more importantly, it is stuff that you can use straight away in your business. In fact, you'll have a question, what is the Goldilocks principle? I'll get to that in a minute. But more importantly, I'd love it if you'd have some questions at the end that we can discuss so that we really help people, everyone on the call, embed this into what they do. Who am I? For the new people who don't know me that well, I've been running my own coaching consulting business for over a dozen years. I've helped 180 business owners turn their business into the right vehicle to give them and their loved ones a great lifestyle. Prior to that, I had 30 plus years as a C-suite executive here in Australia and in Southeast Asia across a dozen different industries. Before that, I used to lecture on business as a guest lecturer at university. Before that, I was a high school teacher. So I've been around the block just a few times. As always, I like to keep these things short and sharp so you have a chance to talk, but more importantly, to network with one another after this part's going. You'll hear the Goldilocks mentioned in a number of ways if you're doing any business research at all. You'll hear the Goldilocks principle, the Goldilocks zone, and the Goldilocks rule, and there's a few others besides, but they're the three main ones. The Goldilocks principle basically says that people prefer the middle. It's based on an idea from a couple of sociologists way back in, I think it was about 1952. Beth Hess and Joan Waring wrote this thing called the Goldilocks principle. It actually appeared in a book on controlling your marriage, but nonetheless, their principle is that the just right amount is essential for making informed decisions, achieving efficiency and maximizing potential in the business world. Their principle of not enough, not too much, but just right is something that you can apply to products, decision-making, pricing, a whole heap of different things. The Goldilocks zone also goes up the just right. The Earth sits firmly in what's known as the Goldilocks zone, which is the habitable zone of the solar system. You'll often hear, especially if you're thinking about when they're exploring the galaxies and whatnot, you often hear them saying they're looking for planets in the Goldilocks zone. The Goldilocks zone primarily means that life on Earth could live there. In other words, there's lots of water, there's lots of oxygen, it's carbon-based lifestyles, it's not silicon-based lifestyles, etc. So the Goldilocks zone, again, is just right. It's not too hot and too cold. It's just right to support life. In terms of people, James Clear, who wrote that book, Atomic Habits, which every man his dog quotes from 9 or 10 times, and which really is quite simplistic and not worthy of all the fame it's got, but nonetheless, it's not a bad read. The Goldilocks rule simply says that humans experience their peak motivation when they're working on things that are right on the edge of their current abilities. In other words, it's something that challenges them without stressing them. It's something that's not too hard and not too easy. The thing is, if you understand these Goldilocks principles, you can use them as leverage in your business to raise things up. The perfect Goldilocks lever is one where we are in equilibrium, where we're in that just right area. But for people, the Goldilocks rule is really about trying to find things that are not too hot, not too cold, not too crazy, not too sane, but just in the middle. In other words, human beings, we have a preference for balance and moderation, and that's what we primarily use to make decisions with. If something's too far either side of moderation, we tend to dismiss it out of hand. Of course, personally, you can apply this to your health and well-being. You know, if you're pushing too hard, too often lifting weights, you'll burn yourself out, create an injury. But by the same token, if you're not lifting enough weights or you're not doing it often enough, then you don't get the results you want. Same thing with nutrition. If your nutrition consists of McDonald's and KFC, Pizza Hut, and the rest of the Ford food groups, then you're not going to be terribly fit and healthy. But by the same token, if all you're doing is eating vegan, you've got your own issues coming up there with the lack of B group vitamins and some other things. So again, it's really about trying to find equilibrium between the two. Think of it this way. If you're going to play tennis and you're playing a game of tennis against a 4-year-old, Even if you're a dedicated granddad, you'd eventually get pretty damn bored and pretty quickly with it. But then if you turned around and started playing against Roger Federer or Serena Williams, you quickly lose motivation because they'd just be smashing you into the ground. That would be too hard. But if you're playing tennis against someone who's got pretty much the same skill level as you, what would happen is you win a few points, they win a few points, but more importantly, you've got a good chance of winning, but only if you really try. So your focus narrows, distractions fade away, and you find yourself fully invested in playing tennis. The challenge of using the Goldilocks principle to you is to figure out what's just manageable in terms of challenging you. There's all sorts of charts available on it, but if you look at this one, the Goldilocks zone really is something that stimulates you and challenges you without straining you too much. In other words, if difficulty and pressure gets too high, there is no real return on investment. You get stressed, you get tired, and you avoid it. And if it's too easy, you get bored and your dopamine drops through the floor. So you want something that stimulates you and is challenging. So how do you leverage this in business? Well, the Goldilocks principle, rule, idea plays into two psychological quirks that we have. People like to feel like they've got a choice and therefore they're making decisions. They also have a desire to avoid extremes. So just like I've spoken in the past about when people buy, they really engage emotionally and they decide logically. It's really finding a middle option that's just right in a business, in what the business is offering to people. So that might take a balance of old and new. It might take an idea of influencing people's incrementally. But the thing is, your content cannot be too hot or too cold. If content's too hot, no, there's way too much information coming at people too soon. And quite frankly, it's probably all about features instead of benefits. You're talking about what the thing's made out of and how many litres per 100 kilometres and all that sort of stuff, instead of talking about emotional stuff. But if it's cold, then it means that you're not giving people enough information to engage them emotionally or enough information to start their process of logically deciding whether they're going to go ahead with it. In fact, if your information is too cold, people walk away feeling like you've wasted their time. The just right part of content is content that engages people's emotions first, stops them being bored, and gives them enough information that they can use the logical part of their brains to make a decision. This is actually where the logic and the emotional part of our brains live, in the amygdala and the frontal cortex. These are the areas you want to stimulate. And even though the amygdala, the emotional center, appears smaller, its influence on how we make decisions is outsized. In fact, we make 98% or more of our decisions emotionally first. So you can even think of it this way. If we split our brain in half of it uses logic to arrive at decisions, but it uses emotions to make the decision. In fact, we often use logic to justify the emotional decision we've made. You use Goldilocks to leverage your pricing. Businesses can leverage this if you differentiate products one from the other. Pricing is one way that helps you. Again, if your pricing's too high, you attract less people. If it's too low, people start worrying about value and quality. So again, you need to be looking at three options if possible. Maybe one that's too high for most people, one that's too low for most, and the one in the middle, which is the people you want. Quite frankly, you should be leveraging your product or service through pricing using the Goldilocks effect. In other words, figure out what is the right price that you want to sell from that gives you the right mix of revenue and profit, the right price that attracts the clients that you want, and then start adding to that. So in other words, what's a cheaper version that for people, which is really just cash turnover, and what's a premium one where lots of people won't buy. It's a thing called price bracketing. And this is one example of it. So you've all seen this, three things. You go silver, gold, diamond, or bronze, silver, gold, whatever you want to call it. And most people settle for the middle price. It doesn't matter what price you bracket there. Most people tend to go towards the middle price. This ignores price anchoring, which we'll get to in a minute. But what happens here, of course, is under this particular setup, you hardly sell any diamonds because people price anchor on the silver and they think it's worth that. The gold's got a few more bells and whistles, so maybe they go for that. Tesla used this very successfully a couple of years ago, where they actually price bracketed but put their most expensive car in the middle of two prices. You can see they've actually got their Second most expensive price is the first one you see, the most expensive price in the middle, and then their cheapest price at the end. And guess which car they sold the most of? Yes, it was the one in the middle. So the cheaper one actually fell off the end of their marketing. Worked very well. Really use price anchoring. Price anchoring is quite simply this: as human beings, the first price we see when we're contemplating a purchase tends to be the price that we decide on is what something is worth. Now, when you do gold, silver, bronze pricing, in other words, cheapest, more pricey and priciest, what happens is people see the cheapest price at 30 bucks and they go, that's what it's worth. And they might pay 50 bucks if it's got a few extra bells and whistles, but they're not going to pay 100 bucks, which is your most expensive one, because in their head it's only worth 30. I've been doing this with clients for years, and what I do is we reverse it like this. We put your most expensive price first. We leave your middle price where it is in the middle, and we put your cheapest one at the end. And time again, what happens here is your platinum, your most pricey one, can go up by over 50% in terms of number of sales. Your middle sales stay about the same, and you sell a lot less at the cheaper end, and who cares? Because that's the cheaper end, you make less profit from it anyway. So if you're bracketing here, obviously you'll still sell more at the medium price than the high end or the low end, but simply by swapping the low end and high end around in their position, i.e. when people are seeing it and helping them price anchor, you will sell a lot more of your premium end product, which means more turnover, more revenue, and more profit, just simply by doing that. The other lever you can use is called same, but different. They are, and people will recognize them, pregnancy tests. If you ever looked at pregnancy tests in pharmacies, you'll actually see they packaged two different ways. It's the same product inside, does the same thing, takes the same amount of time to deliver a result, but essentially people have two different needs. Some people are hoping to get product, so when the tests are sold to them, they're sold in value packs. They're a 3-pack or a 5-pack at a great price with multiple tests, and they usually have the image of a happy smiling baby on the front of them, so people buy that. But if people are hoping not to get pregnant, they're the people who have single packages, and their packaging talks about speeds of results and the promises of reducing worry. Exactly the same product, packaged two different ways, but leveraging the Goldilocks effect to make sure that they talk to what people are after. The other piece of leverage you can do is what's called Trojan horses. They're starting to become old tech now, but when DVD players first came out, there was no need for it, but they actually were deliberately designed to look like VCRs. Why? Because they wanted people to feel a sense of familiarity, but more importantly, they wanted people to have less friction in adopting the new technology. So if it was something that looked the same and worked essentially the same, that reduced the barrier to people taking on the new technology. The original DVD players looked nothing like VCRs when they first came out, or at least when they're at prototype stage. The marketing people were very smart, and that's one reason why DVDs took off with very little friction in the marketplace. So how can you achieve the Goldilocks balance? Well, there's a couple of places always. Firstly, in your own life, look at your own life and decide if you're trying to get healthy, what's too much, what's too little, and what's just right for you. Lots of people say, for instance, the best exercise in the world is the one that you'll actually do. So maybe you're not going to go to the gym, and maybe you're not going to go on marathon runs. Maybe you just might like to play soccer every Saturday. I don't know, but you can use the Goldilocks effect there in your personal life in terms of your health, working out, how you eat, your nutrition, those sorts of things. In business, it is literally looking at your business and looking at, okay, in terms of clients, who's my just right client? Which one is too hot or too cold or too old or too fat or too skinny or whatever it is? Look at your clients and make sure you're talking to the one you want to work with. Same thing with your pricing. We've just gone through price anchoring and price bracketing. How can you apply that within your business to make sure you're selling more of your premium products at a premium price than a lower price? Thing is, using the Goldilocks effect is you have to be adaptable. You have to establish clear boundaries, but whatever area you're looking at, and make things happen. Remember, people don't like extremes. People default to moderation. They default to the middle all the time. Now, whether that's right or wrong for you personally, that's entirely up to you. But the vast majority of people like to play it safe and go through the middle. If you have a product or service that's too outlandish, it's too novel, it's unfamiliar, it's too weird or too hard to understand, guess what? People won't buy it. But if it's something that's exactly the same as what's already happening, then it's going to be boring. And there's no reason for people to change their behavior or their purchasing habit. So they won't do that. So the idea is maybe you Trojan horse it like they did with DVD players. Or maybe what you do is you just make sure that you explain it in a way that doesn't turn people off by it being too new or too old. Bottom line is the middle place is what sells the most. So wrap up is the Goldilocks zone, the Goldilocks rule, the Goldilocks principles is a different way of looking at your business and your personal life. You might have listened to all this and decide it's not for you, and that's fine as well. Look, there's no guarantees that if you try to play on the Goldilocks effect, that will pay off. But it's still worth understanding that when you're looking at your customers and you've got a product or service out there that isn't selling, maybe think about it in terms of the Goldilocks effect and go, well, is it too weird, or is it too much like someone else? Is it too boring, or is it too complicated for people to understand? And that might just be the key that helps you open it up and start selling more of what it is that you do. As always, if you want a hand, help is available. You can book a chat with me. My link is already in the chat box anyway. Have a 30-minute call with me about you, your business, and maybe how the Goldilocks effect can help you. It's not a sales call. It's just something I do for this community to see if I can help you. Are there any questions?
Thanks very much for that, Geoff. Anybody got any questions, please just put your hands up there. You stop.